This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. On July 14th, a federal judge with a well-documented, long-standing hostility towards the Trump administration just protected the most aggressive architects of global censorship on the planet. We're talking about Imran Ahmed of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Yes, the same Imran Ahmed who has been aligned with Prince Harry through Archwell. The same coordinated network that has spent years actively trying to choke off advertising revenue to news outlets, silence American critics like myself, and force U.S. tech platforms to bend the knee to European censorship laws, all while hiding behind buzzwords like mis and disinformation, safety, and hate. These communists ran to a D.C. courtroom with an Obama-appointed judge. They got a judicial stay, and right now it's being advertised as a win. Well, let me tell you something. They haven't won a damn thing. And today, I'm breaking down the breathtaking hypocrisy of this ruling, why this foreign-linked censorship pipeline should make your blood boil as an American, and the exact four-step battle plan that I think we need to use to fight back. Okay? Before we get into it, please hit that like button. This is a video where I need the algorithm to pick up, and you're going to understand why in a second. So to understand the sheer absurdity of what just happened, you have to look at who got halted. Back in May of 2025, Secretary of State Marco Rubio drew a line in the sand. He announced a common-sense visa restriction policy. If you're a foreign official or activist who demands that American tech platforms adopt global content moderation policies, if your censorship activity reaches beyond your borders and into the United States, we're not going to tolerate it. Rubio said that he was going to be pulling visas, and if you're already sitting on American soil, you were going to get deported. Then in December 2025, before Christmas, the State Department went big and sanctioned 5 Europeans under this policy. And look at who Rubio correctly labeled the leading figures of the global censorship industrial complex. You had Thierry Breton, the former EU commissioner who helped write the Digital Services Act, the law designed to force American companies to delete content that Europeans find objectionable. You then had Claire Melford of the Global Disinformation Index, which was an outfit that built advertiser blacklists specifically to choke off revenue to American news outlets they judged guilty of mis and disinformation. And of course, number one on this list, Imran Ahmed, a UK foreign national living comfortably in D.C. as a green card holder, running the Center for Countering Digital Hate. This is the same arrogant, race-baiting know-it-all whose organization spent years pumping out reports to get people banned, demonetized, and slandered. So when the U.S. government, under the Trump administration, finally puts their foot down and says enough is enough, where does this network run to? Well, they go straight to the courtroom of Chief Judge James Boasberg in Washington, D.C. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This makes me so fucking pissed. Why? Because Judge Boasberg has shown open hostility to the Trump administration time and time again. This is a judge who has been slapped down by the appeals courts for overreaching, who's faced ethics complaints and impeachment calls from the House Republicans over his glaring anti-Trump bias. President Trump himself has publicly called out this guy's derangement. And this is the judge deciding that protecting American free speech from foreign censors is somehow the real constitutional threat. Come on. Let's look at how Boasberg actually justified freezing this policy on July 14th. The lawsuit was filed by a group called the Coalition for Independent Technology Research, or CITR, and I've talked about this in the past. They ran into court crying that Rubio's policy was expensive and incredibly vague, and that it was causing enormous chilling speech effects on their network. And how did Boasberg rule? Well, he stated the government is putting a thumb on the scale. He wrote that the State Department is punishing one viewpoint those who favor more content moderation, restriction, and labeling while rewarding non-citizens who argue for less moderation. He called it textbook viewpoint discrimination and blocked the government from enforcing it under the First Amendment. Okay, so let's stop and appreciate the breathtaking hypocrisy of this logic. According to this ruling, from what I gather, the government doesn't get to punish speech it dislikes, even the speech of foreign actors who have built their entire career gladly punishing and silencing ours, Americans. So let me translate this if you're confused. What is happening here is that the exact same network of aggressive censors who spent years pressuring tech platforms, demanding deplatforming, and building advertiser blacklists to ensure creators couldn't make a living are now crying that they are the victims of a chilling effect because America won't hand them visas and green cards anymore. These communists spent years acting as the self-appointed police of public discourse. But the second the State Department says, fine, but an American visa is a privilege, not a right, and you can't come here to censor our citizens. And now these assholes are hiding behind the same First Amendment they have been trying to subvert. And these parasites knew exactly which corrupted judge to run to. I called this out months ago. Back on May 28th, I warned that we were going to see a coordinated attempt to protect this network and keep people like this scumbag Imran Ahmed from being deported. Now, some of you may or may not recall, but I pointed out that Archwell, aka Meghan and Harry, had funded some of the head board members of this supposedly independent coalition. That's right, folks. A UK foreign national and member of the British royal family had quietly funneled money into these radicalized groups actively working to circumvent U.S. speech protections. I mean, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and we've seen them market their work under rebranded, emotionally manipulative names like Safety by Design or Online Child Safety. But it is the exact same authoritarian censorship playbook. And I've said this before, Americans, like myself, have an absolute right to know if money from the British Crown is underwriting domestic censorship. I think we're long overdue for the IRS to open the books. And while we're talking about legal accountability, let's talk about criminal law. Forget Boasberg's temporary stay on visas for a second. Imran Ahmed sat in front of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee on June 25th, 2024. And if you take his sworn statements from that hearing and line them up against what he told UK Parliament and what he bragged about during his media tour defaming innocent Americans, the contradictions are glaring. It appears, and I'm just going to call it, he committed perjury. So if the judge wants to block his deportation, fine. Stop wasting taxpayer money fighting a biased DC court on immigration and start criminally prosecuting this bitch for lying to Congress. Deport is one remedy, but a federal indictment is another option. Sorry, I don't mean to sound so annoyed, but it's like these people that have been burrowed within our government, perverting our justice system, is actually hurting this country and not allowing this administration to do what they need to do to fix the mess that these Democrats have caused. So where does that leave us now? Well, Boasberg hasn't issued a final judgment yet. The government can and likely will appeal. But right now, the policy is frozen. And the censors think that they've won. We're supposed to just sit quietly and accept that foreign censors are the real victims here? And that Judge Boasberg is somehow the defender of the Constitution all of a sudden? I don't accept it. Nope, not for a single second. So here's what we got to do. We got to kick this up a notch and intensify the pressure on Archwell. We demand absolute transparency, and we need to get the IRS to do an official investigation on whether foreign royal link funds are being used to rewrite America's free speech norms. That needs to happen. 2, we need to push for a perjury investigation. Imran Ahmed's June 25th testimony before the House Judiciary Committee must be formally revisited by lawmakers. If the contradictions between his U.S. and U.K. statements rise to the level of perjury, then we need to demand criminal prosecution. And third, we need to support the State Department policy, whether it be by contacting the State Department, the Department of Justice, and elected representatives at this moment. The State Department needs to stand firm here, stating that an American visa is a privilege, not a right, and that the State Department should have the right to take those visas away. Make it unequivocally clear to your representatives that defending American speech from foreign-linked censorship campaigns is not optional. It's a vital national interest, especially protecting the speech when it comes to our elections. After the 2020 election, people were not allowed to say online that they believed the election was stolen or that there was interference. And what's about to happen tonight? Donald Trump will be giving a speech on this exact same topic. Hopefully now you're understanding why this particular post that I put up in my community page is important, especially when it comes to this speech that Donald Trump is going to be giving tonight. In case you did not see this community post or read this article, let me go ahead and summarize it real quick. According to the Gateway Pundit, this piece and the underlying 2021 DOJ indictment it draws upon, Iranian hackers in September and October 2020 breached a misconfigured computer system in one U.S. state publicly identified as Alaska, downloading personal data on more than 100,000 voters, including names, social security numbers, and driver's license numbers. The hackers then created and disseminated a video that used this stolen data to simulate the creation of a fraudulent UOCAVA, otherwise known as Overseas and Military Absentee Ballot, as part of a disinformation and voter intimidation campaign aimed at sowing discord. The article claims that Christopher Wray and Chris Krebs knew about the successful breach but omitted these specifics from public warnings and reports, including Chris Krebs' December 2020 testimony describing the election as the most secure in U.S. history, while CISA and FBI statements at the time focused on broader Iranian influence efforts without highlighting the data exfiltration from state voter systems. Now, if you're wondering how is this connected to Prince Harry, well, Chris Krebs was the co-chair of the Aspen Commission on Information Disorder, which Harry was a commissioner on, to try and clamp down on mis and disinformation, essentially chilling free speech and trying to control the online space. So things like this, if they came up in the future, could have been prevented, right? And according to the CCDH, this conservative media outlet, the Gateway Pundit, was put on a blacklist from advertisers, limiting their not only income but also visibility on the World Wide Web, because CCDH had campaigned and accused this media outlet of election misinformation. And as we're all witnessing, as it turns out, a lot of this so-called mis and disinformation about interference and those Dominion voting machines, specifically the software that's laying on it, as well as ballot fraud for states like Georgia, is now coming to the surface. In addition, saying that Donald Trump won the 2020 election was classified by CCDH as fake news in their Stop Funding Fake News campaign. And what did they do? Well, they went after all the advertisers running ads on the Gateway Pundit. So you can see here as an example, CCDH is shaming Georgetown University for having an ad running across Gateway Pundit's website, which caused a lot of these so-called brands to remove funding as well as advertising dollars to Google. And what did Google do? Google complied. Google suppressed the Gateway Pundit to make sure that it wasn't searchable, to make sure that people couldn't see these articles. But we can't get rid of this asshole here in the United States because this woke judge appointed by Obama refuses to give in to doing what's right for the American people because he's so clouded with his bias for Trump. You know, we all talk about why can't we get rid of Prince Harry? Well, when you look at how difficult it is to get this nobody, Imran Ahmed, removed, what do you think is going to happen if Marco Rubio revokes Harry's visa and green card here? Think about all of those court cases, and then on top of it, the PR that's going to surround it. If anything's going to happen to Harry, I foresee that he will be told quietly that he needs to go, which very well could explain why we're seeing Fox News putting out this kind of stuff. Prince Harry doesn't love life in America, misses the UK, sources say. I'd like to think that, and something is being done to remove this guy from this country because he is a threat to our republic. I'm going to go ahead and leave you with Marco Rubio's speech today combating the resurgence of political terrorism. It's really worth the listen because Harry and Meghan have been a part of this resurgence of political terrorism just by exactly who they've surrounded themselves with and the groups that they had been funding.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us here today. I'm very honored that this distinguished group of people that have traveled from around the world to be a part of this important conversation. We're grateful to you. I also want to thank members of the President's team and cabinet that are here today. Our FBI Director, Kash Patel, who's here with us. Thank you. Our Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, has joined us as well. You'll hear shortly from Stephen Miller, the President's Deputy Chief of Staff and one of his top advisors on Homeland Security issues as well. And of course, our Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, is here. But again, I want to thank all of you that are here today. I want to thank the whole team here at the State Department as well for putting this together. It truly is an unprecedented event on an unprecedented issue, moment, I should say, in our history. So let me start by saying that the most essential duty of the state, the first responsibility, frankly, of any government of any kind, is the protection of its people. It's the protection of its country. This is a sacred obligation that should transcend all political and all ideological divisions. It is why, for example, we have militaries. It's why we have intelligence agencies. It's why counterterrorism bureaus exist, why police forces exist. Keeping our people safe is the reason why every country represented here has all of these things. We are all very well acquainted, as of now, of course by now, with what has been described as traditional terrorist threats. For 25 years, the term counterterrorism, at least in the West, has meant first and foremost the fight against radical Islamist extremism. And there's a very poignant reason for that. On the 11th of September, in the year of 2001, 19 men murdered 3,000 people here in my country. Then that same enemy struck Europe, murdering nearly 200 commuters aboard trains in Madrid in 2004, and 52 more aboard London buses and the underground in the following year. The entire architecture of Western counterterrorism was rebuilt from the studs around the singular traumatic event. That made sense at the time. Our job was to keep our people safe, and the realm of terrorism, the specter of global jihad, was the premier threat to their safety. And so we went to work, and we assembled a global coalition, working with many of the friends that are represented here in this room today, and we destroyed the ISIS caliphate, we killed al-Baghdadi, and al-Zawahiri and bin Laden, and we built intelligence and law enforcement systems capable of anticipating and stopping attacks before the public even hears about them. Every country represented here today has disrupted a terrorist threat at some point emanating from this source. Jihadist attacks and plots in the United States are down by 2/3 since ISIS's peak. The number of people killed by jihadist terrorism in Europe dropped by roughly 97% from the year 2015 to the year 2024. In other words, to a very great extent, our counterterrorism strategy has worked. The threat has not disappeared, of course. It will continue to exist, particularly so long as we tolerate immigration systems that imports these threats directly into our respective homelands. But this threat has been severely diminished. The world looks very different today because of it. For far too long, however, our counterterrorism doctrine has had a blind spot when it comes to extremist violence from the political left. Even today, the very idea that far-left terrorism could be a serious threat is treated as a right-wing fever dream, or worse, as a dangerous fascist conspiracy. It's treated this way by many in the press, by many in academia and our universities, and by many of our legacy institutions. You will no doubt see the dogma rear its head in the coverage of this very conference. In spite of the clear and the undeniable reality, in spite of the objective numbers and statistics, in spite of the fact that in this room today, there are representatives from across the political spectrum, we will hear that this kind of organized violence and terror will be dismissed. It will be dismissed as a partisan fiction. A whole industry grew up in our countries around the study of extremism. We have think tanks and fellowships and journals and consultancies with the unspoken understanding among them that the only kind of political violence that was a true threat to our system, that only one kind of political violence was a true threat to the system. A bomb planted by a neo-Nazi group was a nefarious and murderous act of evil. It is. But a bomb planted by a Marxist revolutionary, well, that's just merely a tragic excess of idealism. Perhaps its means were misplaced or overzealous, but its ends were virtuous and just. That's the implication of how they treat it. For years, this extraordinary ideological prejudice was embedded in the way we talked about political violence and extremism. It was repeated again and again until it was accepted as the neutral and objective baseline, so entrenched in the mainstream conventional wisdom that it came to be regarded as an apolitical fact. It is the reason why, here in my country, so many people in positions of power have repeatedly dismissed acts of violence and even terrorism as legitimate forms of political expression, so long as they served a left-wing cause. It is why during those so-called George Floyd riots in the summer of 2020, as criminals and extremists burned and looted their way through America's great cities and nearly brought the country to its knees, city governments all across the country simply refused to prosecute the people conducting these acts of violence and terror. It is the reason for the now infamous image, maybe you all recall this, of a news anchor from a very prominent agency, a news anchor standing in a neighborhood consumed in flames. Meanwhile, the chyron on the bottom read that the protests were mostly peaceful. This was something worse than a double standard. Left-wing violence was not just excused, it was treated as sacrosanct, a protected class unto itself. That era has to end. The coalition in this room today includes political leaders and experts and law enforcement officials from more than 60 countries across the world. You have come here from a wide range of governments, parties, and political persuasions. Some of your governments and ours disagree publicly. Sometimes we disagree sharply about trade, about energy, about immigration. You did not come here today because you have been persuaded on every single aspect of the American view of the world. You came here. You are here because 2 weeks ago, a 72-year-old woman was burned on over 80% of her body in her own home in Greece, and she died, executed by a firebomb because her daughter dared to stand for office. You are here today because for 5 days this winter, the lights went out in Berlin, the longest blackout in the city since the Second World War, sparked by an attack that left tens of thousands of households without power in the freezing cold and left an 83-year-old woman dead. You are here and you came because a month after that Berlin blackout, a French 23-year-old succumbed to traumatic brain injuries, beaten to death on the streets of Lyon by a group of far-left militant thugs. You are here because your political leaders are being attacked and stabbed and shot in your streets, because your businesses have been bombed, because your railways have been sabotaged, because your police officers have been beaten and burned. You are here because this is real, and it is getting worse, and it can no longer be denied, and it can no longer be ignored, because it is time to crush this evil forever. The simple fact is, none of this that I've just described is new. Far-left political terrorism is not a recent-day modern novelty. It is not a fiction manufactured by conservative politicians. For most of the modern era, it was in fact the dominant form of political violence. Every one of our friends here from the nations of the Western Hemisphere remember the decades of kidnappings and bombings and assassinations and executions, the violent terror of the Tupamaros, of the Monteseros, of the FARC, of the ELN. You remember the inhuman savagery of Peru's Shining Path, the Maoist fanatics who massacred the peasant villages of Peru, hacking pregnant women and newborn infants to death with axes and machetes. You remember the tens of thousands of Marxist guerrillas trained to kill in Castro's terrorist camps. All of you here from Europe remember. You remember the machine gun massacres of Italy's Red Brigades, which held the 5-time prime minister captive for 55 days before subjecting him to a revolutionary so-called people's trial and executing him in 1978. You remember the Red Army faction's nearly 3-decade campaign of bombings, kidnappings, and assassinations in Germany, murdering dozens and injuring hundreds more. You remember the 17 November organization in Greece, the Marxist extremists that terrorized Athens for more than a quarter century, including, by the way, shooting my country's CIA station chief dead outside of his home, in front of his wife, as they were returning home from a Christmas party. And here in America, we remember. We remember the same reign of deadly terror, justified by the same slogans, motivated by the same wicked ideas. We remember the Weather Underground, which bombed the Pentagon, which bombed the State Department, and bombed the Capitol. We remember the Black Liberation Army, which staged armed robberies and executed police officers at point-blank range. We remember the Symbionese Liberation Army, which shot a public school superintendent to death with cyanide-packed hollow point bullets. In one 18-month period, between 1971 and 1972, the FBI counted some 2,500 bombings on American soil, a rate of nearly 5 a day. The overwhelming share of that violence came from left-wing extremists. Between 1970 and 1980, 93% of terrorist attacks in the West came from the far extremist left. These are numbers that would shock most Americans today because we've been taught to believe that this kind of political violence, it simply doesn't exist or it's being exaggerated. But it does exist, and we're actually underestimating it. And our nations bear the scars to prove it. And today we face a new wave of this old evil. Here in the United States, the share of left-wing terrorist attacks and plots has risen to levels not seen in decades. In Germany, far-left violence has jumped by more than 40% in just the last year alone. In Greece, more than 80% of radical violence is now driven by far-left and anarchist actors. These are not abstract statistics. Americans have seen what those numbers mean. An all-out assault on our immigration officers, sniper attacks, explosives, armed ambushes, a transgender shooter opening fire on Catholic elementary school students as they pray, his gun marked with slogans like, "Where is your God now?" A healthcare executive executed in cold blood in the streets. Multiple assassination attempts on a sitting president, and the murder of the greatest conservative activist of a generation, a man who happened to also be a husband and the father of 2 young children, shot and killed while speaking to a crowd of students. This is a distinctive and unique evil. It has always been driven by a hatred, above all else, a hatred for civilization itself. It is a revolt of the worst against the best, a revolt of the weak and the cowardly against the strong and the good. It is perpetrated by those who cannot build, who cannot create, who cannot achieve great things, and take their revenge upon the world for their own inadequacy by seeking to destroy those who can. This is what radical leftism is. It may wear various different slogans and ideologies across place and time. They can call themselves anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist or communist or anarchist or Marxist, but the fundamental character is always the same. It's always the same. It is a poisonous resentment cloaked in the language of equality and justice and liberation, an overwhelming need to tear down what greater men have built, to wreck what is beautiful and what is right on behalf of people who are only filled with ugliness and have nothing else to offer the world. Through violence and through terror, they once again seek to impose their ugliness on all of us. The old dogma was wrong. The old dogma was wrong. None of this is driven by idealism. It is not utopian. In fact, it is the opposite. One of the criticisms you sometimes hear of communism, for example, is that it sounds good in theory, but it never works in practice. That's actually not true. Communism does not sound good in theory. The world it envisions for all of us is small, flat, gray, leveled of all exception, drained of all that is good and noble in the human soul. The world it envisions is a world without courage, a world without creativity or ambition, a world without heroes or glory or great causes to strive towards, a world without miracles, without myths, without men who rise above the rest to do incredible and extraordinary things. And the world communism envisions is a world without God. For these architects of revolutionary violence, the towering achievement of our civilization, for them, it's an unbearable humiliation, a reminder of what they cannot do, and a reminder of what they cannot be. So they choose instead to destroy. They attack pipelines, they attack railroads, they attack power grids and laboratories, the physical embodied symbols of power and invention and achievement. This is the nature of the terrorism we face today. They despise the West because the West is great. This is an international conference because we are facing a transnational threat. These are not distinct and isolated cells. They are interconnected networks. They do not recognize our borders. They do not believe, in fact, in the nation state itself. They coordinate, they communicate, they travel, they train, and they act together, sharing the same infrastructure, sharing the same enemies, sharing the same mission. Antifa militants and their comrades travel from across Europe and to the Americas to participate in each other's attacks, to funnel propaganda and training materials and target information through shared encrypted channels, moving through underground networks of safe houses and finance, and sustain their operations through transnational funds. And they work alongside hostile foreign states that share their mission, like Iranian proxy networks, who are increasingly intimately tied to leftist militant groups around the world. The Cuban regime's sprawling intelligence and ideological network helped to build the far left in our country and in our hemisphere, and it remains inextricably linked to the far left groups and movements across and beyond the West. Today's far left terrorists can raise money in one country. They can host their communications in a second country. They can receive training in a third country. They can recruit militants in a fourth country, and then together strike a target in a fifth country. And so we have no choice but to confront this menace together. We will either cooperate across our borders, or the terrorists will continue to exploit the gaps between them. Under President Trump, for the first time, the United States is building the infrastructure, the partnership, and the strategy to defeat the scourge of far-left terror. The President signed National Security Presidential Memorandum No. 7, outlining a comprehensive strategy to investigate and disrupt Antifa terror networks and their allies. Last November, the State Department designated 4 violent far-left extremist groups as foreign terrorist organizations, and there will be more designations soon. In December, we announced Rewards for Justice, offering up to $10 million for information disrupting the financing behind these groups. In May, we convened the first counterterrorism law enforcement workshop, joining American law enforcement officials and their counterparts in our partner country nations together to map and develop strategies for dismantling these networks. The next workshop will be co-hosted with our partners in Germany. The coalition we're building together is already bearing fruit. And we are here today to build on that work. We can and we must identify and map this threat and rebuild our counterterrorism architecture to defeat it, just as we have done together before. Now we must do it together again. Through intelligence and information sharing, through coordinated law enforcement strategy, through financial targeting and disruption, we will dismantle these networks brick by brick. It is time for the people of the civilized world to defend ourselves, to stand united against this encroaching darkness and fight for what is ours. It is easy to destroy great things. It is far more difficult to make them. The enemies of civilization are only capable of the former. They are only capable of destroying great things. All they know is destruction. But we have built great things together. We have done it time and again. We know what we must do, and now we must do it. Thank you for coming today.
It was such a fraud.